Hello, my name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering. This is the Introduction to SharePoint Framework section as part of the Getting Started with SharePoint Framework module. In this particular presentation, we'll have a closer look on the evolution of the SharePoint user interface. We'll also talk quickly in high level the overview of SharePoint Framework, what does it actually mean, and what are the key differences between the SharePoint Framework comparing to the more classic and older ways of customizing SharePoint. We'll also have a quick demo around the SharePoint Framework behavior and how it's being exposed through out-of-the-box capabilities. If we think about SharePoint, it's been there for quite a long time. Technically, SharePoint started its journey back in 2001, and it's already been 16 years from the first version, official version of SharePoint. That was a SharePoint Portal Server 2001, and it was implemented using ASP at the time. And so the end user experience had obviously the impact, or that impacted the end user experience closely. In 2003, the implementation was changed to ASP.NET, and there was more kind of web parts were truly introduced to be available. These web parts worked in the way that when you were clicking a button or doing a configuration, there was always a postback between the server and the client when we were applying some sort of settings. As part of SharePoint Server 2007, we introduced the SharePoint Publishing. So this is the classic WCM publishing capabilities, which have been there since 2007. And it's actually pretty interesting to think about. It's already 10 years since that capability was introduced. In SharePoint 2010, there was a lot of improvements from the server platform perspective. And then there was a first implementation of the more JavaScript-driven customizations for the SharePoint, which was kind of the client-side rendering frameworks, and then also the extensibility related on provided by XSLT-based configuration. Technically, already actually in 2007 version or 2010 version, you could have been able to use JavaScript as easily within the SharePoint by customizing the pages and then injecting or embedding the JavaScript on the page to change the behavior. As part of SharePoint 2013, there was more and more additional kind of a client-side capabilities available because we also improved the REST APIs and CSAM APIs, which enabled remote APIs way of customizing or modifying SharePoint assets. Well, first of all, accessing the assets and then optionally modifying those assets. 2016 for on-premises was more around hybrid, and that really aligned the on-premises with the SharePoint Online capabilities. And as part of SharePoint 2016, or to be precise, as part of SharePoint Online, first we introduced the SharePoint Framework and usage of Office UI Fabric. The SharePoint Framework and Office UI Fabric will be landing on SharePoint 2016 server as part of the feature pack 2, which is scheduled to happen on a calendar year 2017. As part of these changes which we're introducing in SharePoint Online, we've been introducing modern SharePoint pages, modern SharePoint lists, modern SharePoint sites, and all of these capabilities are using basically SharePoint Framework as the UI rendering mechanism in the background. If we think about the kind of a fundamental thinking about the SharePoint extensibility, our principles have been to build a long-term value-added services for enterprise mobility. What it means is that we want to make sure that the customization model which we're now introducing is future-proven, and it will be there in the future as well. And that's one of the key reasons why the SharePoint customizations is getting aligned on the industry standards. So it's no longer a SharePoint specific way of doing customizations by using, let's say, user custom actions or control templates and so on. We're more aligning on the way how the customizations and web-based technologies are being used on the other platforms as well. Our key objective is to provide exactly the same application development framework for the first party and third party. And what that means is that we in the SharePoint engineering are using the SharePoint framework as the fundamental piece for our customization development as well. So all of the first-party web parts, like the web parts which are available out of the box from SharePoint Online, have been built using SharePoint Framework. You, as a third-party developer, you can then take access on exactly the same APIs, and you can implement exactly the same behaviors as these first-party web parts. We really want to also build an industry-leading client-side solutions or enable to be able to build industry-leading client-side solutions for on-premises and in the cloud. We want to make the SharePoint Framework as a de facto standard for customizations in SharePoint Online and in the cloud. Back in February 2017, SharePoint Framework G8 as a first version in SharePoint Online, and then SharePoint Framework with the client-side web parts will land on the on-premises SharePoint 2016 version later in the calendar year 2017. If we go forward from there, the objective is that the same customization which is used in the SharePoint Online or in on-premises will work in the online and vice versa. Obviously, there will be small differences for those capabilities which are coming, for example, from Microsoft Azure or have some additional capabilities in SharePoint Online. But the basic set of APIs and the implementation style of the customization will remain the same in both sides. One of our third objective, what we want to do, is really to unblock potential of SharePoint and Microsoft Graph on desktops and on any device. And this really refers to that mobility and mobile devices as well, and which is also visible within the UIs of SharePoint. All the modern experiences in SharePoint Online are natively responsive. And we are looking into integrating or easily have access for the developers to use the information through Microsoft Graph. You can easily access access tokens, and you can use those access tokens then get information from a Microsoft Graph when we get this journey completed. SharePoint Framework is really modern client-side development. So using those latest web stack development tooling, and the implementation will be based on the industry standards. It is a lightweight web and a mobile, which will mean an improved performance and the loading times also in SharePoint Online. It powers our own experiences, like mentioned. So all of our new modern experiences within SharePoint Online are based on a SharePoint framework, or they're built on top of the SharePoint framework. It will be backward compatible, which means that whenever we will release a newer versions, we'll make sure that your existing customizations which have been developed on top of SharePoint Framework version 1.0, for example the GA version from February 2017, they will keep on working in the future as well. And SharePoint Framework supports open source tools and JavaScript web frameworks. You can technically choose which framework you want to use by yourself. So it's up to you which of the frameworks you want to use. In Microsoft, we are using React. Do a long comparison between the frameworks, and the React, when the decision was done, was absolutely the best choice for our customization. It does not, however, mean that you need to use React. You can still use whatever alternative JavaScript web frameworks within your customizations as well. So, one of the key points related on the modern experiences is obviously a modern page. A modern page is a client-side rendered page which is affluent, and it actually reacts on the user behavior when you're clicking, when you're doing actions or modifying the page if you have the editor permissions. The modern pages are natively responsive, so it doesn't matter if you're using a mobile device or a tablet or a desktop computer for accessing them. They support client-side web parts, so you're able to use client-side web parts in the modern pages, and they are responsive natively as well because they're developed using the SharePoint framework. There is client-side and persistent cached used, so when you don't always need to hit the REST APIs and endpoints for getting all the time additional information. And the modern page is also mobile optimized, so it is truly making sure that you can easily access the SharePoint Online or the SharePoint in general using whatever device what you're looking for. Here's the simplest example of a modern site page on the right side, and in this case it contains a title, some text, a web part, and then additional text as well. You can these modern site pages are super powerful, and you can create easily beautifully looking pages. As part of the SharePoint Summit announcements in the mid-May, we are also announced that you can do additional columns, additional layouts on these pages. So it's not just about the vertical scroll on the page, but you have full flexibility on having side-by-side web parts on the pages. Really, the key objective of these modern pages is to have an easy way to communicating ideas and information using the new authoring canvas and the gallery of existing web parts. We're looking into extending the set of web parts significantly in the future, and you will see more and more capabilities being introduced within the web part picker. It is actually, the modern pages are built using modern building blocks. So the authoring canvas and web parts are built using the client-side HTML and JavaScript. They are natively updating, or they're fluent, which means that there's no postbacks when you're updating the page or performing modifications. These pages are reusable in custom applications as well. Mobile support is built from the start, which is a big thing for us as well. We really want to make sure that these pages are performing properly within any device what the end users are using. So the content reflows across the device sizes and pages are fast and fluent. And you can actually get these pages to be even better with Microsoft Graph. And what it means is that you, as a third-party developer, you can take advantage of the information in the Microsoft Graph because you will know the user context and you're able to access the information based on the user context as well. We will also introduce first-party web parts which are leveraging Microsoft Graph to surface relevant pages and relevant information for the end users easily, so that there's no third-party custom development necessarily needed. We mentioned the JavaScript as a development language for SharePoint Online in the future quite a few times. So does it actually mean that SharePoint Online development is all in JavaScript? And that's answer for that one is no. In a similar way as in SharePoint adding model, server-side development is still needed for backend services or long-running operations. If you, for example, have a long-running operation on the page which you want to start with the button, with the click of a button, you really shouldn't kind of steal the browser session of the end user by showing, let's say, a GIF animation on a page. You should rather call an external web API, which would then perform the long-running operation. Also, this server-side implementation will enable, for example, scenarios where you want to show information from LOB systems, even up to the level that you have a direct connectivity from SharePoint Online back to your on-premises LOB systems. So you'll easily access, for example, using Service Bus information from your on-premises and surface that within a SharePoint Online. SharePoint Framework really concentrates on the user interface, at least for the time being, so not on fundamentals around API usage. And essentially what it means is that whenever you really need to do long-running operations or strong performance-intensive operations, that's when you call a web API, for example, which is hosted, for example, in Microsoft Azure. And within the web API, you can then do whatever you want within Azure APIs. Let's have a quick look on what does the modern SharePoint page actually mean. And the experience with out-of-the-box web parts. So how we can modify the existing pages and how even the out-of-the-box web parts are completely different than a classic web part from an end-user perspective. So let's actually have a look on the out-of-the-box pages, or the modern out-of-the-box SharePoint pages, and how they behave and what's the experience with out-of-the-box web parts. So first of all, what I have here is a modern SharePoint site, which is created using, well, it's basically an Office 365 group as well. And it looks slightly different than the old SharePoint pages, and that's because it's using the modern page approach within the SharePoint Online. First things to notice is that the whole page and the modern SharePoint experiences are fully responsive. So if I scale my screen size, if I'm using a slightly different, let's say a device, we can see that the whole page is fully responsive. I can still see all of the menus and everything else, and it scales nicely based on the device or the screen size of the device. So everything is working properly like it should be. And obviously this works also in the modern experiences, like in the other modern experiences, like within the site content. The same thing, if I'm actually scaling this, it is adjusting to the size, and I can still see all the relevant information and get access, for example, for the navigation links on the left menu. Now, on the actual new pages, so let's actually have a look on that one as well. So let's create a new page, out of the box modern page to the site from a demo perspective, and you'll see that it's slightly different experience than it used to be within the SharePoint. We're not going to spend too much time on this one, but it's actually important to realize that we're kind of simplifying the editing experience and making it much more fluent and much more performant as well. So let's give this page a name. So let's call this, for example, SPFx training demo. And you can actually see already right now that, hey, there's no ribbon. And that's by design, because all of the functionalities and the elements that you can put on the page are within this page, web part picker. And in here you can find, for example, information or individual web parts for adding a text or content or images and so on. So we could do something like welcome to our magnificent page, and we can then format that to be, for example, heading 1 for this one. And we can adjust the settings as we move along. When we're doing this video recording, we just recently had a May announcements or SharePoint Summit announcements in spring 2017, where we already announced that you can have multiple columns within a page. So right now, when we're doing this demo recording, that multi-column capability isn't visible yet within this normal SharePoint Online Developer tenant, but that's coming soon as well. So you can actually have multiple columns on the page, and you can adjust the page layout as you move along. From a web part experience perspective, it's also important to notice that the web part, the whole editing experience within the web part is completely different. So these are all out-of-the-box web parts within this tenant. And if we, for example, use the image gallery web part, you can see that it's fluent, it's native, there's no postbacks when we're adding that web part on the page as well. And let's actually upload some example images to this web part. So let's see, let's take, for example, these guys just for demonstrational purposes. And I can add those images directly to the site using that web part. As you saw, again, no postback, no movement between the site assets or images library. You can actually do all of the work as you move along and as you set up the settings for the web part. We can also modify the web part properties in the same way as we used to do in the classic web part experience. But this is also a really, really important thing to notice. We only show those properties and configurations for the web part which are meaningful. So in a classic SharePoint, you had a lot of kind of additional width and height and title and all of those settings. In the modern SharePoint, in the modern experiences, these web parts, which you can create as well, and don't actually expose any additional settings for the end users, which might be confusing. So you, as a third-party developer, you can actually implement exactly the similar kind of experience relatively easily using the SharePoint Framework platform, and then you can define what kind of properties you have available and how the web part behavior changes based on the end user selection. One thing to also notice that this is responsive in the sense of when I'm changing anything in my web part, slightly depending on the web part settings, you can actually preview those settings on the page as well. Image carousel, the out-of-the-box first-party web part, is a good example. You can select between tiles and carousel, and then you can choose close that one, and there we go. Our settings have been committed on a page. So there's no postbacks, there's no additional, let's say, complexity and apply and OK buttons if you don't want to. You can actually set your web part to be non-responsive, which would mean that there's an apply button in here, which does make sense in certain scenarios. But for a simplistic scenarios, showing the option directly based on the user selection in the page immediately is really the most suitable approach. Now that our page is ready, we can simply publish that, and the page is rendering natively again and fast on the page on the side as well. As you could see, again, no postbacks, no reloading of the page, no nothing. Everything is happening automatically and fluently within a browser context. And that's really the key power of the SharePoint Framework. So we use SharePoint Framework in the SharePoint engineering to build all of these new modern experiences. And you, as a third-party developer, you can absolutely implement and take advantage of all of these goodies and capabilities which are available for first-party web parts as well, because the platform is exactly the same for first-party and third-party developers. In this section, we went through kind of quickly the evolution of SharePoint user interface, and we also had a quick overview on SharePoint Framework. We also had a quick demo on how the modern pages are behaving and what's the whole idea and what are the key changes from an end user perspective, which you as a third-party developer can also take advantage within your customizations. If you're looking into more details on the SharePoint Online or on-premises development, we highly recommend you to have a look on the SharePoint Patterns and Practices. SharePoint Patterns and Practices is a community-driven initiative coordinated by SharePoint Online, which we provide, together with community, code samples, solutions, reusable components, guidance documentation, and community calls. The themes are on SharePoint Framework, SharePoint Adding Model, Microsoft Graph, and Office 365 API. AKMS SharePoint PnP is the one address to remember, where you can find additional set of resources and links to all of the material which is available. Thank you for watching.